we'll look at the concept of security in Prism. Now, how many phases does Prism have?
When you said phases,
I mean the Prism management workflow, right? We saw that the Prism management workflow has
kind of an ETL tool, so there is extract, transform, and load.
Yeah. So yes, there is. So we have extract, transform, and load. But this is overall divided into several phases, or 5
Okay.
phases to be precise, right?
Okay.
So we get data by creating tables, data sets. We then transform this data by creating derived data sets. And then we apply security to this data. We make this data available for analysis. And then we finally analyze this data, right? So we have already completed the phase 1, in the sense we have created our tables and base data sets to bring all data into Prism. And then we created a number of derived data sets to finally get the data in the form that we wanted, right? Which means now we can apply security, and then we can make the data available for analysis.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Now, if you remember, in terms of Workday security, when we discussed, we did discuss some bit about Workday security. Okay. So in terms of phase 1 and 2 that we have completed, how we did speak about security in brief, right? When we initially started, you remember? So we said, okay, so when we, for example, let's talk about Workday report. So when you run a Workday report, you need access to the report, and within the report as well, you'll only see those rows that you have access to, right? Plus, within the rows that you see, you'll see only those columns that you have access to. For example, you may not have access to date of birth and you don't see that. But then when the data comes into Prism environment, which is data set or table, Workday removes all security.
Right. Yes.
Right? Okay, so Workday removes all security, and basically anyone who has access to the data set within the data catalog or table within the data catalog can access all rows and can access all columns, right? So there's no constrained security at all in terms of Prism environment. Okay, now in terms of security, what kind of security can be applied on the tables, base data sets, derived data sets within data catalog? We call something called table sharing and data set sharing. So basically there are 2 types of security here. The first one is the security access that is granted by admins, right? Your security administrators. So this will basically determine whether you can access data catalog at all or not, right? Whether you can access the data sets and tables at all or not. That is the basic security, right? And here, if I can quickly go into the tenant and show you the domains. So we have okay, so here we have a number of similar domains. So for example, you'll be able to create a table when you have Prism tables create access, right? Similarly, you'll be able to create a data set when you have Prism create data set access, and so on and so forth. Now for this, if you see, most of these are admin or if you see, these are all unconstrained domains.
Right, right.
But
That's
then
what I was about to say. So these are all unconstrained, right? So,
unconstrained domains, yes. But then here, let me go into the tenant. So what we usually do is, let's say, so what we do is, if you see, we have a data administrator domain, but if I come back, we also have something called Prism data administrator domain, right? So usually what we do is, we have a separate security group type,
mhm.
which is Prism access security group. So whenever we have to give access to Prism, for example, I'm the data admin within my company. I also need access to the Prism environment to create, view, modify the data sets. But
Right.
then all Prism create and all those domains are not directly added to the data administrator security group. What we do is, we create some Prism access security group. So this is what we'll do, which is exactly similar. I'll create a security group. Prism access security group, or let me edit one instead of having to create one. Okay, so if you see within this, this is also an unconstrained security group. And within this security group, you assign your data admin and other roles. And then all Prism access to Prism domains is not directly given to data admin, instead to this Prism access security group. Makes
Okay.
sense?
Okay.
Right?
What is the data admin? Are those user-based security groups or?
Yeah, these are all user-based security groups.
Okay.
Right? So in terms of user-based security group, you don't directly assign Prism domains. So in terms of these security groups, so Prism domains are not directly assigned to user-based security groups. Example, data report writer or data admin. Instead, create a Prism access security group and include your user base security groups within it. So that is how Workday has delivered this security group type. And that's how we do it, right? So we create a Prism access security group, which is nothing, but it is a group of other unconstrained security groups, right? And then all Prism related domains are given to this security group.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, how else can we control? So for example, how else can I control who all can see these tables and data sets that I have
One quick
created?
question. So
Mhm.
if you are giving the domain policies to the Prism security group, uh,
Mhm.
then it's not related to data administrator, right? Or data analyst.
No, see, it's not, right? So data admin, for example, I have DA, data administrator, and I may have 10 employees as data admins, right? I include this data admin in Prism DA, and I may have out of these only one EMP2 and EMP11. So on this Prism DA, I give all Prism related domain access, and only these three individuals would have access to this Prism DA or they'll have Prism related access. Is that your question?
So PDA, employee 1, employee 2.
So this is similar to your intersection and aggregation, if you remember.
Okay.
Right?
So if you have both data admin, data analyst and whatever security groups, if you have the intersection security group, then only you will get the access, right? So
Yeah.
are
So
you
this is
saying?
similar to that concept,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Okay. Now, is there a way? So even in phase 1 and phase 2, wherein we have created all base data sets, tables, and derived data sets, is there a way I can restrict access to specific data objects? When I say data objects, these objects, there is, and that is done with the help of table and data set sharing. So basically, anyone who has access to a specific table or a specific data set, we know that has access to all data within that table and data set without any constraint and without any context. So we can restrict who has access to a specific table and specific data set. And how do we do that? So if I open any table or data set, go to the related actions. So the moment, and if I go to security, if you see, I have something called data set sharing. So let me open this. Now the user who created that object, so whoever creates a table or a data set, whether it is base or derived, automatically becomes the owner of that data set. Make sense? So this I created using the proxy of Logan McNeil. So Logan McNeil is the owner of this data set. Questions? Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Now, as an owner, Logan can then make someone a dataset viewer or dataset editor.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
So only dataset viewer can basically view that dataset, or only dataset editor can edit that dataset and further share that dataset with other users. Right? So if
Right.
Logan McNeil gives me the dataset editor permission, let me open some dataset which I would have created. Let's see this one. So this is wherever I am the dataset owner, I'll also have the edit permissions. So I know because I don't see the edit dataset, I just get view permission, which means, or let me proxy as Logan McNeil and then we'll see how it. So if I proxy as Logan, you'll see how the permissions change. All right, so this is our first data set. Let's open this. If I go to the related actions, security. So here, if you see, not just I have view dataset sharing permission, which any which ways I had here, but I can also edit the dataset sharing and see the entire history. So as Logan, I can, because I'm the owner, I can go in here and I can make anyone dataset viewer. I can make anyone dataset editor.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense.
Okay. Now there's something called, if you see, there's something called relax sharing as well. Now, this is how it works. So I have created a, let's say, base dataset 1, right? And then from this, I create derived dataset 1. And from this, I create derived dataset 2, right? Okay, so for this dataset, this is upstream, right? So this side is upstream. And this side is downstream, right? This is exactly similar to your integrations. So I get data from here.
Right.
So this is upstream from me.
Right.
I send data here. So this is downstream from me.
Right.
Okay. Now to access any data set, let's say I'm trying to access this data set or this data set, you must have access to all the upstream data sets and tables.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So what I can do is I can go ahead and enable relax sharing, saying that even if I don't have this person, so I'm giving access to this person called EMP1 on this data set. And I'm saying, okay, go ahead and enable relax sharing, which means even if this person doesn't have access to any of the upstream data sets, let him still access this data set.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so when you enable this option, owners of the derived data sets from this table or data set only need viewer role here. So they only need role here. So for example, if I give them data set editor access without having access to any of the upstream data sets, they can themselves go ahead and share this data set with others.
Okay.
Right? If I enable relax sharing. So they only need role here to share this data set. Right? They'll not need any access to any of the upstream data sets. So I can go ahead and share a data set or table. And when I'm doing that, I can give either viewer access or editor access, and I can enable relax sharing. So the basic concept of relax sharing is, as I mentioned, so by default, to access the current data set, whatever it is, you must have access to all upstream data sets and tables that feed into this data set. So as an example that we just saw, to share a derived data set DDS, you must have permissions on the derived data set that you are sharing, and at least viewer permission on all upstream data sets and tables. So if I want to share this data set, I should have the editor permission, because only then I'll be able to share. But at the same time, I should at least have viewer permission on all the upstream data sets. So that is the default setting. When I enable relax sharing, it will allow me to share this data set.
And if you enable relax data setting, can he change any of the upstreams?
No, because on upstream, he just have viewer permissions.
Okay. Okay. But can he change the derived data set too? Like
Yeah,
the
because
downstream?
if I have editor permission, I can change that
Okay.
data
Okay.
set.
Okay. Okay.
So if the editor permission is there, then obviously I can go ahead and.
Okay. But if you have view permission, then also you cannot change. You can just view the data with the relax permission.
Sorry.
No. If you have view access and if
Mm-hmm.
you have granted relaxed permission, he
Mm-hmm.
cannot still change the data set number 2, right?
No, you cannot. You cannot.
Okay.
You
Okay.
cannot. Okay.
Okay. He just can view DD1 and BDL.
Exactly. So this is similar to view and modify permission
Okay.
on
Okay.
a domain, right? So
Okay.
with
Okay.
view, you
Got
can only view data. With modify, you can.
it. Okay.
Okay. So that is, I can go ahead and share by default the person who created that data set or the table becomes the owner. He can make or share either viewer or editor permissions with any of the individuals, and then he can also give the relaxed sharing permissions. Okay, so that is what I can do with respect to security in phase 1 and phase 2, right? Which is basically getting the data as well as preparing the data for analysis. Now, all my transformations is done. Now I need to release my data set, basically publish my final data. So once I publish the data, it will be available for analysis. So before I can publish my data, I want to apply appropriate security permissions. So the moment I publish my data comes out of the Prism environment, right? It becomes available to users so that they can create reports. Okay, so let's see what was our final. Okay, so this is our final transformed derived data set, right? Now this is what I would want to publish. But
Right.
before I publish it, I want to apply appropriate security permissions to it. And I do that if I go to the data set. In terms of security, I have these data sets sharing security, which we have already seen. But then I can also apply data source security, right? So as part of phase 3 that we discussed, which is apply security to the data. So in phase 3, we apply security to the data, which is basically data source security. Okay, so I'll come in here, security, and I'll say edit data source security. Why is that? I do not see. Mm, mm. Let me publish it first. Mm, okay, I'm doing phase 4, which is basically I'm publishing this data set.
Okay.
Let me do that. So what happens when we publish a data set or when we make a table available for analysis?
You can use that table for reporting. Yes.
Okay, so this is what happens. Workday creates a Prism data source, right?
Hmm.
Applies all security permissions to that data source. So when I say applies all security permissions to that data source, the data source security permissions that you have applied in phase 3,
Okay.
right? And loads this data source with data, right? From the published object. When I say published object, this could be a table or this could be a derived data set. So when I do that, this would take a while. Okay. So when I do that, Workday creates a Prism data source. Right now, there's no Prism data source that has been created. Applies all the security permissions. Currently, we have not applied any security permissions. So it is taking the default security, and all the data in this data set gets loaded into that data source. So we'll first publish, and the reason I'm publishing it first is because I don't see any of the fields within this uh, data set for applying security. So that's why I'm publishing it first. This just takes a while. Mm, Okay, let me select some domain first. I'm not sure why. Okay, so the publishing is successful. At least that's what I saw. So it has created a Prism data source. If you see, when I publish a data set or a table, it creates a Prism data source.
Okay.
It loads that Prism data source with all data from the data set, and then it applies all the security permissions, which means if I go in now and create a custom report, I'll be able to do that with this Prism data source. Okay, but that is not what I want right now. What I want is to be able to apply Prism security. Oh, this is strange. I'm not sure why it is not showing any of the fields. Let me stop proxy. Okay, all right. It seems like Logan McNeil didn't had access to
Okay.
update the data security. So this is why I tried to publish it, because it should show me all the fields which are part
Okay.
of that data set, right? Now, in terms of security, we can apply two types of securities. Okay, the first one is the security at the entire data source level.
Okay.
Right? So this basically controls the security at the entire data set. So what we are, sorry, at the entire data source. So in terms of security, I can apply security at the data source level. So here we basically specify one or more security domains that apply to the Prism data source that Workday creates. So these domains basically determine or control which user or users can access the Prism data source. So this is security, just like we have security at any data source level. When we create a report, you need access to that data source, right? Only then you'll be able to run that report,
Right.
view the data in that report. So we are basically first level of security that we are creating is at the data source level. Now here, based on the data in your data set or data source, you'll apply appropriate security domains. So for example, here I see personal data. So I will probably want this to be available to, so I'll say, okay, worker data. So I basically want anyone who has access to worker data active employees, and let's say worker data, all positions, and so on and so forth. So basically now what is happening? The data source that gets created, it is encapsulated within these domains.
Okay.
And if this domain, so this is how it works, right? So I have data source, DS. I'm including this in a domain, let's say domain 1. Now we know that domains are part of security groups.
Okay.
Right? So if this domain is part of, let's say, HR partner security group, then, and I'm a member of that security group, then I'll be able to access this data source, right? Because this
Okay.
data source is included in this domain and HR partners have access to this domain, right? So
Also, you need to include whatever the data source or the Prism
Mhm.
report that you have created in a domain.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right? So basically, if you see now, I have said, okay, I'm applying the data source security on this data source which will get created, and I'm doing that using these two domains. Now, if I open the first domain, active employees, this domain is shared with all these security groups, which
Right.
means all of these security groups, they would be able to access the data source that gets created, or when I say access, I mean access the reports that are created using this data source.
So irrespective of the fields that are available in the
We'll
Prism
talk about field
report.
level security. Yeah.
No,
So
no, no.
now,
Irrespective of the field that you have included in the Prism BDA, so if you grant the
yeah,
access to the domain,
right.
then you should be able to look at it. That's what you're
Exactly, because if you
Okay.
see these are not fields. So when I say gender, this is not the gender field which is available in Workday,
Right,
right?
right.
So
It's not
this,
available in worker, it's in personal information. So,
yes,
okay.
this gender field is part of this data source, and it
Okay.
has the transform data that I have modified as part of creating this data source or the underlying data set,
Okay. Okay.
right? So if I have access to this domain and no other security is applied, then I'll be able to access every data within this data source.
Okay.
Even if,
Okay.
let's say, in Workday, I don't have access to age or date of birth, right? Because in Workday, if you need access to age, you need access to domain, that worker data, date of birth domain, right? Makes sense?
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the data source level security. Now, optionally, what you can also do is you can do row level security. Now, what is row level security? There are 10,000 rows in my data source. Can I access all rows? This is similar to your constraint security, right? There are 10,000 employees in my organization. I
Right.
can only see compensation for 50 employees, right? So I can also apply a row level security. And how do we do that? With the help of securing entities. So if you see, securing entities are required when applying contextual security. So I want to give constrained access, and I do that by configuring securing entities. Now, when I go in here, it will show you all securing entities that are part of your data source or your data set. So when I
Okay.
come here, if you see, I have management level, I
Okay.
have supervisory organization, I have company, right? So
Right.
all those organizations or objects which are part of my data set, Workday will show here, and I can select one or all of them. So now I have applied these two securing entities. Now that constraint access kicks in. So let's say now I have shared this data set with this domain, DOM1.
Mm-hmm.
That domain is available to HR partner. And this EMP1 is an HR partner. And in this data source, there are 10,000 records. So if this is the only security I apply, EMP1 will be able to access all 10,000 records. And so will be EMP2, who is also an HR partner.
Okay.
But then I apply row level security, RLS, and I say this is secured by your supervisory org, or let's say location or anything.
Right. Right.
Let's say sup org. Now, EMP1 is an HR partner for only 5 supervisory orgs.
Okay.
EMP2 is the HR partner for remaining 15 sup orgs.
Okay.
So now, even though both EMP1 and EMP2 are HR partners, and HR partners have access to this domain, which includes this data source, EMP1 will only be able to access those rows which are tied to the supervisory org that they are HR partner for. Similarly,
Okay.
EMP2 will only be able to access those 10,000 rows for which which have that supervisory org for which they are the HR partners. Make sense? So
Yeah.
this is how I apply the constrained security. And the same applies for any number of organizations I select. Okay. So let's say there's another security group called company partner.
Okay.
The same logic, because company partner have access to this domain. All employees who are company partners, they would be able to access all of these rows.
Okay.
But then I have also applied row level security using company. Now, some person has access to one company, they'll only be able to access relevant records. Another person has access to 50 companies. So each of these securing entities act in independence.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the second level of security, which is basically the row level security.
And second level of security, it's kind of a role-based security, because whatever
Exactly.
you're saying.
Exactly. So this
And
gives you that constrained access.
okay. And also in the second level of security, you are going to get only organization type of securities.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Because row level security is usually controlled by organization, right?
Right. Right.
You create a security group and then you create, what do we create it?
Assignment roles.
You create an assignable role, and the assignable role is linked to an organization, right?
Right.
So that
Right.
is how you control role level security in Workday as well. So exactly same concept. The only difference is you'll only be able to select those securing groups which are part of your data set, right? Because that's how Workday determines. So there are 100 employees. One employee belongs to supervisory org ABC. So I am an HR partner of that supervisory org. Then I'll be able to see that employee, right? That's why that row should be part of your data set.
Right. Okay.
Right? Okay, then we have field level security. So if you see, this is field level security. Now here, default domain has been applied, which is public reporting items. So public reporting items, it's a Workday delivered domain, right? We cannot configure it, we cannot change it. So basically what this default domain is saying is all people who have access to this data source will basically be able to access all the columns, all the fields within that data source, right? So I've not applied any column level security at this point in time, right? And that is why I said maybe HR partner, they don't have access to view gender and race and ethnicity of the employees, but because HR partner have access to this data source, in this data source, they'll still be able to see race, gender, ethnicity, and everything. Now, in order to avoid that, I can create field level security. Now here I can say, okay, only those people who have access to this domain, which is person data, date of birth, will be able to access this column. Make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So now this domain, if you see, is available worker data active employees is available to all of these security groups. But out of these security, so they can all access all rows and all columns in this data source, right? I then applied securing entities, which means the constrained security group, for example, partners, can only access those rows that they have access to based on their company and supervisory org, but they can still access all the columns. But now I have said out of these security groups, only those security groups who have access to this domain, date of birth, will be able to access age. Make sense? So now I'm also applying field level security, right? Similarly, I am also saying only those people who have access to gender, this domain, will be able to access this column.
So basically you are assigning the domain and the domain has the security groups that will derive how to display the data.
Exactly. So these domains, only those security groups who have access to those domains, right? Right? They would be able to see this particular data, right? And this would already be controlled and configured, right? This is all configured in your, so you're leveraging Workday security. You're not setting up entire security model on your own.
Right. You are leveraging the domains and it will automatically derive what to display.
Exactly. Right? Similarly, I can configure for each of these fields: race, ethnicity, marital status, religion, and so on and so forth. So I can configure for each and every field, and then I'll say next. It will show me any errors, any warnings, these summarizations of everything that I've done. So it says this is available to this security group. It gives me some additional information, some audit information. It shows this would be is available to this domain, which is available to these security groups, and so on and so forth. And if there is any warnings, any issues, right? So let's see what is this warning. It says the GMS Service Center Security Group isn't supported because Service Center Security Group constraint isn't supported in Prism data source. So what it is basically saying is Let's see, where is GMS Service Center? Yeah, so it is saying you have shared access to gender and age, right, with this domain, right? Now this domain is shared with GMS Service Center Security Group, which means GMS Service Center should also have access to age, right? But Prism data source don't support GMS Service Center security groups at this point in time. So it's giving me an audit warning. That means GMS Service Center users will still not be able to access age.
Right.
Okay, so that's it's giving me those audit warnings. I'll say fine and I'll say submit. And done. So now when I go here and view data set, data source security, it shows me all security that has been applied. Okay, I'll come in here. I can create a publishing schedule, right? So that, okay, why do you want to create a publishing schedule?
So that whenever the data is effective, maybe you can get based upon that.
So what happens is once you have published a data set, right? It takes all data in the data set at that point in time,
right,
and makes it available in the data source, right? Now, you have already created an integration schedule to load data into your base data set on a daily basis, or you have already created a data change task to load data into your table on a daily basis, right? So your underlying base data sets and your tables get data on a daily or a weekly or monthly basis. They automatically feed into the derived data set. You don't have to do that. And then that feeds downstream until it reaches the derived data set, which has been published.
Okay.
Right? Now, this derived data set has the latest data, which is getting fed into your data catalog on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, annual, whatever.
Right.
But then if this data has to be made available in the data source, it has to be published, right? So that's why you have to create a recurring publishing schedule.
Okay.
Right, which is exactly the same concept. You create a schedule and then you say run now, daily recurrence, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
One thing to remember, whenever you are creating publishing schedule, make sure that your schedule starts only after all your integration schedules and data change task schedules have completed. So let's say you have an integration schedule. I'll say INT schedule to load data into your BDS 1 and 2 and 3 and then you have data change task, which loads data again on a daily basis in table 1. Right? Now, all of these, you'll have to understand which one has a dependency. So let's say they don't have any dependency. So this is scheduled at 8 a.m. in the morning. And this is also scheduled at, let's say, 8 a.m. in the morning.
Okay.
Now you'll have to see how long this runs on a daily basis. Let's say it takes around 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever.
Okay.
So then keep sufficient time so that if there is a delay or a failure, so if it is, it will finish by 12 o'clock, only start your publishing schedule after 12 o'clock. Right, at the minimum, because only then your latest data would be available in your base data sets. Let's say you publish your data set at 9 a.m. In that case, when your data set is being published, your derived data set, your base data sets still don't have the full data. Right? So your data set would get published without the latest data being available.
Right.
Okay, so always make sure whenever you're creating a publishing schedule, the publishing schedule should start only after all the integration schedules have completed.
Okay.
Okay, because I applied security, I'll publish data set once again. If we want, we can unpublish the data set as well. If we are making any changes,
Okay.
I want to publish it once again. It shows me all the let me cancel this. Okay, this is already done. So when okay, because the publishing is running, now it doesn't show me the publishing option because publishing is running. Okay, any which ways, let me come here. We'll not talk about this because we already know a custom report. All Prism data sources are indexed.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Not this one. FSC. So my Prism data sources are indexed. So this has created a Prism data source. I can open the Prism data source. The business object is the same as the data source. Workday just appends a Prism to it.
Okay.
So if I go in here, right, when I go in here, so this is my primary business object, which is same as data source, and then it suffixes Prism to it. Right? If I go to this business object, it shows me all the fields that were part of the data source. Right? Okay. In terms of data sources, this is my data source.
Okay.
Okay. I can come in here. I can create a custom report, and then it's exactly same from here. So I can come in here. I can create any of these reports, advanced, composite, matrix, and so on and so forth. And I can leverage.
Okay.
So when I go in here, okay, you'll see all the fields which are part of that data source are available, and these are all indexed fields.
Okay.